Today's tutor, Sarah Reeve, took part in Portrait Artist of the Year in 2023, producing a bold yet intimate portrait of award-winning businesswoman Vanessa Kingori, who was a big fan of the painting.
I'm going to go for Sarah's.
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you so much. It means so much. Thank you.
As were we judges.
Sarah Reeve.
Which earned her a place in the semi-final. There, she upped her game with a painting of former Spice Girl Emma Bunton.
Go big or go home.
Go big or go home, exactly.
Love it.
And charmed her with a finished portrait.
I love the colours you've used, the bright pink behind instead of the red, actually. It is very me.
Sarah's mastery of large brush strokes produced powerful portraits.
It's OK because I bought my big decorator's brush to fill in the gaps.
Makes her the ultimate tutor for today's masterclass, loosening up.
Today we're going to be looking at how to loosen up. It's something that people often say, especially when they've sort of maybe had a little bit more experience of painting, that they're starting to feel like their paintings feel a little bit too tight or a bit too controlled. I've found that this is often because people use really tiny little brushes a little bit too soon. So what we're going to do today is be brave, and we're going to just use one big brush for the whole of one painting. We've got a great reference here of my good friend and lovely model, Jade. She's got quite a glowing skin tone, so let's get started on our initial marks that we're going to make. So I'm going to be using burnt sienna. It's a very, very thin mix, just to get that starting part down on the page. So what I'd really like you to focus on is almost as if we're sculptors. So imagine that you've got like a big piece of marble or a block of wood in front of you, and we just want to start making those initial marks. I'm using here a really cheap and cheerful decorator's brush. It's a 1.5-inch decorator's brush. It really isn't going to allow us to be too precise at all. And I haven't soaked it in solvent, but just enough to start making those initial sort of carvings in. So what I'm wanting to focus on here is just really the large shapes of dark and shadow on Jade's face. It's a great reference image, this one. We've got some really nice kind of tonal contrasts. But as you can see, I'm not getting too fussed about kind of the positions of the eyes or the nose or the mouth. I'm just following my way around the reference image and really focusing on these key shapes that I can see here. So this is very sort of provisional marks at this stage, and I'm not worrying too much about likeness. As you can see, the brush isn't letting me do much more than just put in some very, very provisional marks. So have a bit of fun with this stage. So you'll see a face is slightly appearing. I'm not getting too fussed at the moment about whether there's a real likeness or anything. I'm just really still trying to look at these key areas of light and dark that I can see here in the reference image. We're keeping it nice and light, so I'm going to be able to go back in it in a minute with a slightly a slightly more decisive brush than my decorator's DIY brush. Okay. So at this stage, as I say, we're just treating it as if this was like a big sculpture. I want to get something onto the white of the paper that's going to give me a bit of a map to work with as we're going round. So the brush is already sort of surprising us with what it's doing. I might put a little bit here just to give a bit of an indication of some sort of background. OK, so now if you were starting off with a tiny brush, you wouldn't have done this drawing. So it's already forcing us to embrace what the brush has done. It's made some marks we might not have expected, and we're going to have to work with it now. So next stage. So I've picked this brush here. This is going to be my brush of choice. So when we're doing a big brush painting, sort of pick one that you perhaps wouldn't use. This is like the larger end of my scale. It's a 1.5-inch synthetic flat brush, quite boingy, quite versatile. This brush is going to do a lot more than you think it can. So I'm going to kind of just start by, again, I just want to sort of map for something that I can come in with later. We've got our initial marks that I've made underneath with our sort of initial blocking in, but I'm not religiously sticking to that. I'm feeling like I can still start making some precise marks. And I want to notice as well that I'm standing up whilst I'm doing this, OK? I'm not like this. I'm not signing a contract with my face right next to the thing. I'm standing back a little bit. I'm giving my arm a bit of flexibility, and I'm giving myself the scope to make some marks. So we're not seeking perfection. Remember, I do quite like setting a goal for each painting, and I like to sort of think, like, what am I going to achieve from this? So our goal today for this painting is literally, we're going to do one painting with one brush, and it's a big brush. So that's our goal. What you need to do at this point is squint. And I know it's not the most flattering of things to do, but if you really, really squint, or if you wear glasses, take your glasses off, because you need to see this in sort of shades of dark and light. That's what we're looking for. I'm not looking at each individual hair on her head. I'm looking for sort of key shapes of light and dark. And the brush is really going to only allow me to do that. Ooh, now look, see, now here's a thing. Can you see this? This is what I'm really enjoying about just using one brush. Rather than kind of ducking out and thinking I'll use something else, this brush is already giving me something I wasn't expecting. And particularly when it comes to hair, can you see there's these marks? Oh, who'd have thought a big brush could be this exciting? Like, look at this. So that's not something I would have been able to achieve with like a small brush. I'd have over-noodled it. It wouldn't have really worked. But look, there's some really dynamic mark making here. And that's what we're going to try to do today, is preserve these initial marks that we're making. So what you'll notice is I can't be that precise, all right? The brush is loaded with paint. It's got some solvent on it to help it move around. I'm having to sort of go with what's happening. I haven't got a plan of how this is going to look in the long run, and that's part of this exercise, is taking a lot of the control out of our hands. And if you're finding as you're working and you're working your way around the face that you've perhaps got a line that you didn't quite think was in the right place, that's okay. You can use a little bit of solvent on your rag. You can kind of just knock it back slightly. We're still working quite lightly with the paint. We haven't gone in too hard, and it's still quite a lovely sort of warm bronze colour underneath, which suits Jade's skin tone. So just make those corrections. This is our opportunity to do this now, before we start putting the colour on, and keep working your way around the face. So as you can see, I'm not going to get fixed on one area. I've not stayed here or here. I'm seeing everything as a whole. I'm continuing to squint to try and see these large shapes of light and dark. I've just got a couple of colours mixed up now. So the big brush so far is serving me well. Let's keep going. I'm going to start off with this shape here, the area around the hair. I wouldn't use black straight out the tube. I like to make my own black up, but I'm actually going to knock this back into a sort of more of a brown colour. We're going in with the big brush, OK? So it's a 1.5 inch. It's going to make quite a broad stroke. This is going to be my darkest colour that I can see. And I'm just going to try and follow the sort of tonal map that we've decided down here I tend to work from dark to light, especially when you're working with a big brush, because they're quite thirsty things. They do drink a lot of solvent and paint. So my recommendation would be that you don't mix yourself a tiny little pile of paint each time. Mix a reasonable amount because you're going to need it. Let's have a look at these shapes. And I can see that it's slightly darker here than is this section here. If I'm really squinting, this is the sort of darkest section here. So I'm just going to keep my attention on that for now. It's a really lovely shape. I love this ear. I'm obsessed with ears at the moment. And what's really good fun, and I'll show you later, is that you can kind of achieve a really convincing ear with a very small amount of brush strokes. Simplicity is going to be the key. And that's what's so great about a big brush. You really can use it to just kind of simplify things and surprise yourself with the marks that come out of it. Now, I was quite enjoying the way that these sort of marks were coming, so I don't want to totally paint over them, but maybe just use them as a bit of inspiration. And can you see you're covering a lot of space really quickly? So it's becoming quite an exciting method. If I was using a teeny tiny little brush, if you think sometimes people get, feel like their paintings are too tight, too controlled, if they're using a brush that's kind of only that size, like a little cocktail stick with 3 hairs sticking out of it, that would take quite a while to cover that area of paint. But as it is, we've managed to kind of create quite a sort of nice, loose, flowing feel of hair, which is fantastic. I'm going to leave, maybe I might just indicate that the hair's coming in here, but again, look, I'm using the brush. That stroke isn't something I'd have been able to achieve with a normal brush. I'm using this brush in a different way, and I've got this really, the way that hair actually feels like it's coming out of your head. So you can see here on Jade's head here. So I've just mixed up a slightly lighter shade now of this shadow here, because it's not quite as dark as the darkest darks here, but it is a little bit lighter. I'm just going to go in here and just try and see if I can really refine that line. And I'm not getting too fussed at this stage about the difference between eyebrows or eyelashes. I'm just using this as a shape to kind of get these shadow shapes in here. So one thing that's really important when you're using a big brush is if you're only going to use one brush for the whole painting, I would suggest you make sure that that brush is kind of white every time that you put it into a new colour. So you can see I'm just really making very sort of broad colour suggestions here, and I'm really focusing on this simple area on this side here. You'll be surprised how little information you need to give to indicate something. Our brains are very good at seeing faces and at making up kind of the rest of the content. We don't need to give the viewer of our painting everything. This brush isn't letting me outline every little detail. So in a way, this is proving to be my friend. But you can see how just these kind of little patches of colour added in can really give the indication of a face, or the eye that's sort of falling behind into the shadow, without having to over-detail. And that's what we're trying to loosen up with today. We're trying to loosen up from that really tight control that people get. And I do understand it. Like, when you really care about your painting, you really want to, like, oh, I want it to be perfect. But sometimes you just got to try and just be like, maybe it won't be. Maybe it won't be perfect, and that's OK. I would say at this stage, this is the point where I usually think the painting looks completely bananas. The colours are kind of everywhere. There's not sort of as much expression as I'd like. I do have a bit of a tendency to kind of want to control, you know, things and get into the details. So this is why these sort of exercises are so good for me. You just got to trust it. The brush is going to see us through, I promise. So one thing that's really important when you're painting a portrait is do not forget the background. I have to say, I've heard people say that the background is like the secondary character in your portrait, and it can really make a huge difference to your figure, so don't forget it. So because we're still working with one big brush, there's a limit as to how kind of detailed we're going to get. There's also not that much going on in this background, so we're going to try and stay fairly true to our reference. I've mixed up a nice sort of stage of this nice kind of slaty grey. So I'm going to do something called like a ribbon background. We're going to use a nice big brush and literally just kind of mark our way around the face. So it's a really good opportunity to just define your lines, really observing and paying close attention to this jawline here. Just got some quite subtle changes in direction. Whether or not I'll be able to achieve that with this brush remains to be seen, but I'm questing for it. So I'm going to sort of really do my best to seek out that difference. So as you can see, I'm not going fully all up to the edges. I'm just trying to create this ribbon of grey that's going to read all the way around Jade, and it'll just set our portrait into a context, but it still keeps that kind of loose, expressive, undone feel. So there's a number of problems when we're using one big brush and you're mixing a lot onto the paper. It ends up being a little bit muddy or a bit flat. I would be really cautious of using too much white as a top tip that you can take home. Often people, when they want to lighten something, you'll add white to it. But actually white can be quite flattening. It can make things go quite cloudy and kind of can take a bit of the light and character out of something. So in this case, I've used quite a lot of, say, yellow ochre. So that can be quite a good, it's a lighter shade, it's a yellowy shade, but it isn't quite as cloudy and harsh as the white that we've got. White's super useful, but we very rarely use it just straight onto our painting. One of the main things really about this is that it just probably will look a bit weird. You're using like a really big brush. It's probably very out of your comfort zone, kind of proving to ourselves that we can do it. So one problem that I often encounter in my paintings, and you may well do as well if you have pets, is that I invariably end up with some sort of pet hair in my painting. And so it's nice that my dog feels like he could have accompanied us today, but I don't necessarily want that in this painting. So don't be afraid of just reaching in and grabbing things out if they're not quite in the right place. I'm just making that go away. We've covered the eye here quite loosely, to be honest. There's not really much on, but your brain, as I said before, is very good at making up the gaps. We're working out kind of, we know that there's two eyes, a nose and a mouth going on. So one of the real challenges of using this great big brush is that when you want to get into the detail, it feels a bit sort of like you're like this with it. And so we're just going to explore now how you can do small details with a big brush. So I'm just going to do a really simple exploration of this ear. There's quite a lot of blood that usually goes through an ear, which I quite enjoy. And the ear is kind of like, you know, it's not the main event. It really isn't. Your eye's going to be drawn to the nose and the mouth and the eyes. So because we've got this ear here, we can have a bit of fun with it. So I'm always a big believer of like seeing how few brush strokes you can kind of get involved. So far we've used one. The big brush is going to make us do whatever we want, you know, it'll have something to say. And that's kind of part of the fun of oil painting, that you're letting the paint have a bit of input into the painting. So you can see here, I'm just getting some quite thick, gloopy paint, which I'm quite enjoying. Now, if I was working with a little brush, again, I'd be like, I'd be probably trying to get too precise into here. I don't need to do that. I can do this with a brush. I'm just trying to simplify it. Ooh, let's do something a bit more jazzy. We'll give a little section of the ear just here, the dark bit just there. Sort of, we just nod a wink to it. So that's 4 brush strokes that we've done there, and we're now going to finish off, I think, with just a little bit of the kind of added section, just to calm that down a little bit. So these are just our finishing touches to the ear. And because the paint's really wet here, it's really, really juicy paint, the brush is really piling it on, I'm having to be very decisive about the mark making. So my brush discipline is coming in to the fore. Great. Let's just connect that ear to the head, because at the moment it feels a little bit like it's sitting slightly separate. So with that ear, the base of the ear that I've just painted there, the kind of key paint that I've used for that is cadmium red. It's got this kind of fresh, warm feeling to it. OK, so I think I'm probably reaching that stage where I'm finished. I could keep going in and in and in, but actually the brush sort of won't allow me to. It'll just get more muddy and confused as I go. So I just wanted to have a little quick chat with you and just really observe all the different brush strokes that we've made today with this big brush. I'm really enjoying what's happened here with the brush marks, the hair kind of feeling like it's coming out of the head. We enjoyed our splodgy feature ear that we worked on, very few brush strokes. One thing I really am a big fan of, and I'm going to let everybody do this, is you can actually use the end of your brush. Ha-ha, I didn't say you had to use just the top bit. You can use that bit as well. And we might be able to see if we can just get a little highlight into Jade's eye. Don't go mad with this, because you could find yourself just doing a drawing all on top with the end of the brush. That would be cheating. So I can see just this little subtle glimpse of that burnt sienna underpainting come through, which makes that eye feel a little bit more whole. And also edges. So I'm also a bit of a one, because this is our sort of finishing touches now, of a bit of finger painting. So, so a really good thing I like to do is just to smudge these edges so that it doesn't feel like such a broad shape. So I'm just going to smudge this section here underneath the chin. Trying to make sure my finger's not completely clean and completely dirty, and then smudge that bit down there as well. So can you see it just softens it a little bit? It stops it being too stuck on. I'm just going to review the rest of the painting. This top area up here, it's just feeling a little bit stuck. So we're almost kind of applying that depth of field that you might see in photography or kind of filmmaking, where we don't want everything to be in focus. But try not to overdo it. It gets very tempting just to do the whole thing like this. So don't do that. I think we've met our goal today. We've managed to achieve a whole painting just using one big brush. Step outside your comfort zone. I think you'll really be impressed with the results. You'll surprise yourself with what the big brush can do. I promise you, I'm going to convert you to being a fan of big brushes.
If you'd like to find out more about these masterclasses, go onto our website, skyartsartistoftheyear.tv.